All right, what is shaking? It is your boy, Marc Cordon, positive psychology, happiness coach. I am so honored to have been interviewed by Denny and Tristan on the Unknown Talent podcast. Both of them are just so funny. They're so open, and they made me really comfortable with being vulnerable and sharing some things about my own life and about happiness that I never shared before on any podcast or any interview. I'm so proud of this interview, and I hope you enjoy it. Also, for the Unknown Talent podcast fans, fans of Tristan, fans of Denny, I want to offer you up my book. You can go out and get it in January, or you can pick it up from me. If you type in www.marccordon/book.br. That's Marc, M-A-R-C, Cordon, CORDON.com/book, B as in beyond, R as in resilient, book BR. I hope you enjoy the podcast and download the book and have a good one. Take care. Bye.
Iedereen heeft talent. Maar hoe kun je dit talent nou optimaal benutten? Wij ontvangen maandelijks inspirerende gasten met een ongekend talent. Dit is de Ongekend Talent Podcast. Deze podcast wordt mogelijk gemaakt door Gulliver Trainingen, Link Fotografie, Meerte Koppelaar Identity en Brand Design en Root Media. Dit is de Ongekend Talent Podcast. Thanks for having you in our podcast. Who is Marc? Tell something about yourself. Who are you?
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, Denny, Tristan, thanks for having me on. If I ever were to start my story starts with the meeting of my parents in the Philippines. My parents are from the Philippines. My dad is from the north, so that's like he's a city boy. My mom is from like the southern part of the Philippines, so she's like a country girl. They met up in Manila, the capital, and they're like, I'm checking you out, right? Then they came back. When they moved to the States, they ran into each other in a place called Ohio, which is like Midwestern United States. No one is there. And so they were like, did we meet each other before? And
really, they didn't know, had no appointment. It was just
no. They were working in the same like health hospital system, and I think that's why I always give praise whenever someone asks me who I am, because I don't know what it's like to be able to leave an entire country, leave the entire family behind. They both did it, a lot of siblings, and so they ran into each other in Ohio, and they said, you know what? We've met each other twice across the world. Let's do something special. So they created me. So I guess that's where my story starts. And it starts with the story of two immigrants who came to the United States and really started a life for their children. Both of my parents are physicians, and I grew up all American life. Nintendo games, TV, soda. Anything that they never had, they brought my sister and I. And so you could ostensibly say that I grew up very happy. And in retrospect, I think that I was a very happy person growing up. Now, the things we also learned about that they couldn't teach us were on TV, like Michael Jackson. We learned about music. We learned about TV. We learned about culture from the things that we saw on TV. Passion, right?
Yeah.
And so when I went to college, the very first thing that I thought was, you know what? They went to the United States to become doctors. I'm going to follow their lead, and I'm going to become a doctor. I'm going to make the family proud. That's what's going to make me happy. And so I went to a pretty prestigious school, studied neuroscience. I got my master's in public health, and I was working for a hospital system for a bit. everything seems fine, right, y'all?
The American dream.
The American dream, right?
Yeah.
And one day I realized I still want to be Michael Jackson. So I up and quit my job, which paid pretty well. And I joined a band.
But how did you decide? Because now you said, I just quit, but...
I think that I was young and I had a pocket full of aspirations, and I didn't think like I didn't have kids. I didn't have anything except for myself. And so one of the biggest things that I had when I was younger was this moxie that whatever it was that I could do, I could create. And so I felt like, what better time than when I'm in my early 20s? I joined a band, I had a master's degree and all this other stuff, but I thought that would make me happy.
Yeah. Can we go a few steps back? You were telling you were not happy.
Yeah.
You were kind of lucky, but you were not happy. Why? What was happening with you internally? What were you thinking? You had a nice job, you had a nice income. What made it that you weren't happy?
Well, you know what, Denny? That's a good question. You stumped me already 5 minutes into the show. To think back to where I was back then, I thought happiness was that I just lacked sadness. The fact that there was no sadness in my life probably meant that I could assume that was what happy meant. You know, and so I wouldn't say that I was depressed. I just I didn't feel flourishing. I didn't feel like I was myself. And I don't know if y'all have ever felt that feeling before, where it's like, you know what the feeling was? The feeling was that I was settling. I knew that there was something else out there. But if I look back to what I was doing then, I was settling. And many people would say, you've got such a great privilege to go to an institution and to make it through and get good grades, be a neuroscience major, then go and get your master's degree. I remember there's a picture of me, I'll send it to the show notes. I was holding up my master's degree and I had this big old smirk on my face. You can see it. I looked like a cocky asshole. You know why? Because I thought that I had the world figured out, y'all. I thought that I was happy. I had a master's freaking degree. I was the man.
Yeah.
And so after a few months of working, sure, I could pay a few bills, but that didn't mean that when I went to bed at night, I was feeling fulfilled. I was going to bed, and in retrospect, I was lonely. And I couldn't figure out why. And so I kept pushing myself, thinking, if I just grow up, or if I just listen to what other people tell me to do, then eventually it will stick with me and I'll be happy. If I just listen to what the status quo or the archetypes say, I'll be happy. I'm too much of a young kid who doesn't know the world, you know? But then there was something that said I'm settling. And so at the time, I put together something, and it was like maybe a vision board or something, and it was, what is it that I want to do? Well, I've always loved entertaining. And you guys are looking at me right now, and it's just like putting on a rock show, just having you two in front of me right now, you know? I've always loved entertaining. I've always loved being able to inspire a crowd. And so it wasn't necessarily the music that I loved about someone like Michael Jackson, but his ability to get in front of people and they leave a show feeling like they've been entertained and inspired and wanting to do their own thing. And so it took me a few years being in a band and then sleeping on couches, you know, doing that like stereotypical band thing. And suddenly there was a contract in front of me. I can stay in a band for a very long time, not make a lot of money like I was making in the hospitals, but if this is what I really wanted from life, well, life just delivered. I could be Michael Jackson. I could sign that contract to be in music.
Yeah. And now you're saying a very beautiful thing, and we hear it a lot. You need pain to enjoy happy feelings again.
Yeah, and you know what? In terms of when I went into positive psychology a few years later, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
But when I went in there, one of the biggest questions that I asked myself was, will you ever understand the wonderment, the awe, the happiness of life without feeling loss, without grieving something. I don't know, guys. And I'm not coming in, we just talked. Everybody listening, we just had a muffin together, and I told them I don't have answers, I just eat a muffin and tell stories, right?
Yeah.
I don't have the answer to that. But what I do know is that there's enough research out there that shows that when we go through stress or even trauma sometimes, not everybody, we can show signs of ecstatic growth from that. And so positive psychologists are calling that post-traumatic growth, which says without that pain, you can't have that gain. But then there's another there's another thing that's going on right now called like truly ecstatic growth that implies, can we grow without having to feel that trauma, without stress being that thing that activates the energy for growth? And so what I would throw out there is for anybody listening, and Tristan, Denny, let's go to the other side. What was the best day in your lives, aside from you two meeting each other and becoming best buds on a podcast?
That was the best.
Yeah, so second best day of your life.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
The best day in my life. The best day in my life was, I would say, one of the best days in my life. Otherwise, I do other people short. But I think one of the best days in my life was when I was walking a long distance hike in Holland. It's from the north to the south of Holland, and it's called the Pieterpad. And I had my backpack on, and there were a lot of grass fields that were like a day before they mowed it. Mm-hmm. And you can smell the new grass. And yeah, just walking there on my own, traveling the world with a backpack on my back, and yeah, that was one of the best days in my life.
Yeah. What about you, Tristan?
Maybe it's a little bit of a answer you will hear a lot, but I think when I became a father, that was so scary, but also special. That is so it makes you a different but a more whole person. It's not just me anymore, but you want to give love, you want to give knowledge to somebody else. There is somebody who looks like you, looks at you like, hey, I'm dependent on you, and you feel a sort of responsibility. I'm gonna raise you, I want to do everything for you, but you also have to accept that it's like scary, because in the beginning I was so happy, and the day after I was like, shit. Yeah. Where's the vodka? I have to. What did I do? And I turned on the news and I saw war there, killing there, and I said, I brought a baby in this world. What an egocentric thing was it? But that was just 5 seconds, and then I thought, no, this is so beautiful. You have a chance to help a little person in a world and be a part of somebody who grows up, and that was so beautiful. So I think that's for me.
Yes.
And I have 3 kids now, and I feel the same 3 times. It was just as special.
Awesome. So just to throw out what a lot of people go and say is that idea of trauma will cause growth. But then I would also say, based on what you both just told me, this idea of hiking and feeling completely in harmony with where you were going from Pieterpad. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right? And for you, the idea of bringing life into the world, and before you got all scared shitless, like the idea that like the miracle of holding an extension of you, a legacy, and you're on a podcast and you're almost at a loss for words right now. That to me is proof that we don't need to be in pain 24/7 to grow.
No.
Now, as a positive psychologist and a coach, I feel like when it hurts, you feel that pain, but you don't have to suffer. But that's where you can grow. But also when it's good, when it's a sunny day like it is in Miami, and we're looking out here and we're enjoying muffins together, and even if this is the only time we're meeting, we're growing from it. and we're getting goosebumps from the conversation. And so there seemed to be a part in my development where it's not becoming the doctor, it's not becoming the rock star. It's something, and I'm pointing inside of me, there's something in here that needs to be unleashed. And I couldn't explain it as happiness. I couldn't put a word to it, y'all. But I just knew that there was something that needed to happen, and I was settling if I took either a nice job or became a stereotypical frontman of a band.
Yeah, because you were telling about your Michael Jackson experience.
Yeah.
And I still want to hear the end, of course.
Well, thank goodness Facebook didn't exist back then. So,
Yeah.
But, okay, so yeah, what happened was on a nightly basis, like we were getting the gigs, we were getting the shows. I worked very hard at it. I treated it like it was a job. I didn't treat it like, booze and cigarettes and all that kind of stuff. I treated it very seriously. And anything that you treat seriously and you commit to and you're dedicated to, I think that you can slowly get better at. And there was proof. The shows were getting better. There were more people showing up. I guess if it was like modern time, more people would be subscribing.
The dancing was also a part of it?
I was not afraid to dance, I wasn't doing Michael Jackson dances.
At the end, we will take a movie and we do the moonwalk.
We'll moonwalk. But I think the thing is this was also a big thing that I learned from being in a band. I started off by singing other people's songs, singing in their voice, thinking about how would Michael Jackson sing this? How would the Red Hot Chili Peppers sing this? And towards the end of it, it became Marc Cordon's voice that was coming out. It was my songs. It was my apparent suffering or my inability to deal with pain and not understand why I couldn't bridge this idea of wanting to serve my family, but also wanting to be happy in terms of me doing the things that made me happy. And it always seemed like there was a gap between the two. Either I had to do what my family wanted, or I needed to do what this rock star kid that couldn't grow up wanted. And I could never find a bridge between the two. And now that's where, I'm not saying that it's shits and giggles every day, y'all, because that's not what positive psychology is about. But I do feel that this optimal performance is very real, whether it be on a podcast, whether it be us sitting on the couches, whether it be me hanging out with my son, whether it be me hanging out with my father who's getting older now. All of it is about performing at an optimal level, showing the frick up, trusting the process, telling the story, and owning it. And I can't feel more grateful right now to have gone through that story.
You have a very positive energy, man. Yeah, I
Is
really
that good
like.
or bad?
No. No. It's obvious that you're a coach, man. You're coaching us. You make big steps in the story, right? So why is it? So it's obvious that you like and help people.
Yeah.
With music or with in positive psychology, take the stage, help people, get the best out of those people. But why? Why do you want to do that?
I don't think it's ever changed, Denny. And I don't think I could have ever articulated it on a podcast until maybe now. The one thing that, whether I'm a life coach or whether I'm working in another job or when I was working in university, I just want to empower as many people as I can while having as much fun as I can. So it did seem at the time that play rock and roll music and tell my story of being an Asian American, that would empower a lot of people, and that was a lot of fun. Then when I went to the university and I taught positive psychology courses, same thing. If you're coming to a positive psychology course, we are going to sit across from the table. We're going to break a meal, and we're going to be intense, and we're also going to be able to be vulnerable about our stories. Happiness isn't all about making each other laugh all the time. There's some hard stuff that we have to go through. Just like that day after your child was born. And it was like, what did I get myself into? And so I think that the consistent message that I've had is the idea that one person, when they affect another person, they are an empowering person. They have a locus of control that's greater than themselves. And when you start talking about something that's greater than yourself, you're getting out of your own ego. You're serving community. I know you two have served your communities in different ways, right? And for me, that's a way of service. But also at the same time, the idea of having as much fun as I can is me claiming that I don't have to do this and be a martyr. I can do this and own the fact that I'm good at it and also be able to feed my son. So I think that's it. If you want me to clarify that even more, and we can, but that is, whenever I'm making a decision about whether to come to a conference or whether to go on a podcast, will I have the ability to empower more than one person, and will I have fun doing it?
Yeah, but still, Sinek, I mentioned it before in other podcasts, the why, how, and what.
Yeah.
And still, I hear the how and the what.
Okay.
And a little why I hear is to feed my son. But is there other why? Everybody has a bigger why. Why do you want to help people empowering themselves?
I guess this is the part where it gets a little selfish then, right? My why becomes selfish. I would say that the biggest parts of the story that y'all haven't heard were the parts where I felt invisible.
Okay.
And when someone has this empowering moment where they feel like they've been seen, when they feel like not only do they belong to the community, but they can make an impact in the community. I think those were the times when, those are the stories that I'm not telling right now. Those are the stories where I invite myself back to your podcast to tell you about the dark days, right? But I think to be completely honest, like I can come out here and say, look at me, I'm at the top of the mountain right now. 90% of that was climbing that mountain, falling on my face. The arguments with my family saying, what is going on, man? Like, you have a job lined up, like you've done all these things right, your hair's growing out and now you're living on people's couches. Then the same thing, what is going on? You're teaching happiness courses and you're telling us that you're unhappy, and now you want to be a life coach? What is a life coach, right? Just because you're getting paid well, and just because something seems like it's going right doesn't mean that you don't feel invisible at the end of the day. And I think that that might be something that more than a few people could relate to right now. And especially given the type of things that can distract us. We can get on YouTube, we can drink our sorrows away. We can find a lot of ways to not feel like we matter.
How would you describe positive psychology? Because maybe a lot of listeners are like, okay, they understand your story.
Yeah.
What is your definition of positive psychology?
I don't think it's any different than what a lot of people would say. It's the study of what's working. That doesn't mean that you ignore what's going wrong, but also at the same time, I don't know about y'all, but whenever I'm working with folks, they're like, what went wrong? What was bad? For anyone who's a perfectionist, you'll get a 9 on a test, and you'll not pay attention to how brilliant you were. You'll just look at that 1 point difference. So positive psychology comes out and says, let's build on that 9 before you go and destroy yourself, perfectionistic people. Let's build on what you've started, and then let's make some minor adjustments versus throwing everything out there and only looking at the bad. And every time it's bad, we only think about the bad stuff. So positive psychology isn't a complete deviation from psychology. There was a humanist movement in positive psychology that looked at what is the best that we can find in humankind. And then there was a war, a great war that happened across the world. And we needed psychologists to focus in on things like post-traumatic stress disorder. It was an all hands on deck storyline, and we abandoned that for a little bit. And so back in, the turn of the 2000s or something like that, a few psychologists came back and said, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're looking at the other end of the spectrum. If we're looking at a human that's languishing and we get them out of languishing, it doesn't mean that they're flourishing. And what can we do to get them flourishing?
So basically you can say you don't have to be sick to get better. You don't have to have some kind of disease or disorder or just name it. You can start with what's positive, what is my strength, and build on it. And also accept maybe these are things that are not my talent, not my strengths, but you can still build on it in a positive way.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's, Tristan, I think that's one of the great things about positive psychology is that you can be in a negative space and someone is there, like therapists are there to help move you in a positive direction. But just because you're not in a negative space doesn't mean you can't continue to grow towards infinity, right? And what's wonderful about positive psychology is that all of us as a community espouse that we're trying to help each other get there. Whether you're a therapist, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a podcaster, whether you're a coach, we're all trying to get people there. +1 every day for everyone, right? Now, the thing that's also awesome about positive psychology is that you can be sick, yet you can still be happy and flourishing. And just because things aren't going well that day doesn't mean that you can't operate at your full capacity to that day. So it's not just illness, you're screwed, happiness, positive psychology. It's much more subtle than that. And it involves much more than just the positive psychologist or the coach or the therapist. It involves a whole community.
Who is your inspiration?
When it comes to my inspiration, I think my mom and my pops, and that's why I might start this. My son is my inspiration. To see my son and to see Daddy will come home and be worried, and he's not worried. He's present. To see him in awe of life, that's what I want. I want to constantly be in awe of life. When it comes to positive psychology or just inspiration in general, I think the writing of Aristotle is wonderful. Aristotle, who put out this idea that, okay, it's one thing to get happiness from daily gratification, the hugs, the grape, whatever. But then it's another thing to feel like you've lived your life to the fullest and you've lived a good life. That was the beginning of me thinking about, what does the good life look like for me, Mark?
Is this something you want to learn your son? Is this a life lesson? If there is a life lesson, what is the most important you want to teach your son?
Okay, so I've never approached it this way before. So Zach, one day I'm going to play this back for you, son. So if you're mad at me, I'm definitely going to play this back for you. I'm going to play this podcast back for you, son. Regardless of what I ever tell you, mommy tells you, Lola tells you, and society tells you, create a blueprint and a template that works for you, son. Because we try to follow everyone else's templates about what's going to make us happy. And deep down inside, you're going to have to figure that out for yourself. And there's going to be a lot of ups and downs and all arounds. And I'm here as a parent to support that. And I also feel it sometimes when it goes down. But ultimately, following someone else's plan for you might not work out. And so to come from a place of self-concordance, son, I don't know if you know what self-concordance means yet, but follow that purpose and create your plan around it versus mimicking other people.
So, and is it maybe, in other words, be the director of your own life and create your template, your blueprint?
Uncle Denny said it better than Dad could say it. Yes, absolutely. And I mean, the idea of blueprints.
You don't have to do what your father did.
Nope.
You don't have to do what your community did or your sports club. Or you have to do what you want to do. Be the director of your own life.
Yeah. And so, I mean, when you asked me that question, Tristan, the first thing I thought of was, ideally, the world is a blank canvas for my son, and he can do whatever he wants. And I hope that that's what I can portray to him through positive psychology, through whatever, negative psychology, Filipino psychology, I don't care what it's called. You know, because at the end of the day, that's one of the things that I want to hang my hat up and say is that I'm a decent dad. I'm not a perfect dad, but I'm a decent one.
And if I was the devil's advocate, when I grow up, my parents said you can be whatever you want to be, and I was like, wow. But it's also a lot of pressure, because I studied, and then I saw I cannot sing. But I want to sing. I cannot be everything I want to be.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people struggling with that because they feel sort of pressure that they have to do everything in life that is possible. What's your opinion about it?
Yeah, well, that's possibly why my why statement sounds like a how statement, because empowering as many people as you can while having as much fun as you can isn't really a smart goal. It's not specific, measurable, blah, 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 right? But it might be enough of a big, hairy, audacious goal that drives me and helps me understand that I can still save lives and not be a medical doctor like my parents, but still have the same values that they had to serve and care. And so sometimes I think that us focusing too much on the outcome versus trusting the process of what does care and service look like? Well, I can't serve and care until I become a doctor. We can't put out this podcast unless we get sponsored, by every football club in Europe, and the Peter Pot Hiking Society. No, we do, and we do the best we can, and we do it today, knowing that we have a big, hairy, audacious goal that's a little bit riskier than what it was the previous day. But also at the same time, it keeps us guiding forward, right? So I might be a little bit out there, but if my son said, I want to try to join the gymnastics team, we'd sit down and look at it and say, okay, this is what a plan to do that might look like. Sacrifice a lot of time, a lot of things. You're probably not going to be eating what you want to eat as a kid. You're probably going to be missing a lot of your childhood. But we can take a risk and go after it. But also, at the end of the day, what is it that we learned from that risk? There's always something to be learned from going after that big, hairy, audacious goal. And I think that the pursuit of goals that are very specific can oftentimes result in outcomes that aren't what you wanted. But also, at the same time, there's something to be learned from it. And I think that it's a fine line that we walk. It's a fine line. Bring the devil's advocate questions. I'm liking these.
Is it also that I hear a topic that came up with me is growth mindset and fixed mindset. How do you talk to your coachees about the negative things in life?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think one of the first things that not only coachees but myself, because I'm very positive negative thinking in my mindset. Like the first thing that comes into my mind was that good or was that bad? And then I'll put it into a box and then make decisions about whether it was good or bad, and then try to continue decisions based on that. Oftentimes I will prejudge something as good or bad before I've even learned of the long-term benefit of something. So just to throw out there, my son was an oopsie. My son was not planned. And I would probably say he was the best fucking thing that ever happened to me. But I wouldn't have known it at the time, And sometimes those 2020 things where you're reflecting back, you made an erroneous decision to judge whether something was good or whether it was bad. Also, at the same time, I would throw this out as an example. I mean, I'm just telling stories now. I worked at an institution for 14 years. You could say that it was a bad day when I got fired from that institution. But in retrospect, I would not be in Miami. I would not have a coaching business. I would not probably even be talking about growth and fixed set mindset sets, eating cupcakes with brothers from like across the seas. You never know. And so one of the first things that I talk to my clients and myself about is, what part of me is judging this right now? Because when you start to judge something, you're putting a value on it without ever knowing. Actually, when you start to judge something, you could erroneously devalue it before you even understand how good it is for you, you know? So when you're talking about that, accepting that shit, right? Without that shit, without that crap, you can't have those seeds grow from it, right? You can't have anything grow out of that. So there is a certain amount of, when sometimes we see destruction happening in our lives, that's the beginning of growth. That's the fertile soil of growth. And so sometimes when my clients will come in and say, all this bad stuff is happening to me, it could be the beginning of a shift in mindset where maybe it's not bad, but you're a little bit scared because you're beginning to make a little bit more money than you ever thought. Or maybe someone is asking you to go on your podcast and you don't think, like I didn't think that I would be good enough for your podcast. But you know what? If I judged myself and wrote myself off, I would not have waited 2 hours for your asses to come out. And so I think the first part is looking at what am I judging? And getting rid of judgment. And then beginning to take action without judgment.
I think you can see it as a big forest fire. The whole forest is gone. The soil is perfect for new growth. And there's a lot of space for new things. So I think this is the perfect metaphor for the story you just told us.
Absolutely. And oftentimes people will look out and say, look at all this destruction and death and despair right now. And I'm not saying that that's, you know, a hurt can come, houses can be lost, lives can be lost in things like forest fires. And yet we don't know what's gonna grow from that. And it's kind of like this universal cycle of change. And when our egos are taken out of it, and I'm not saying an ego is necessarily a bad thing or a good thing again, but when we pull ourselves out of that equation, we can see that there's some sort of universally awesome design that's going on that we're all a part of here. You know, it is true. You know, those falls, those forest fires, getting fired, unplanned changes in your role in lives, becoming a caretaker, whether it be to a newborn or to your elders. All of those things are change, and it can feel destructive at times. But really, it's this part of growth, right?
I also work in a hospital,
yeah.
And you see a lot of suffering. It's hard for people to be positive then. But still, one of the main things when I speak with nurses is that even where people are really sick, sometimes they are better than people who don't have anything at all. There were people with cancer, and they were so positive and so full of life that they were healthier in a sense, and that was so inspiring. And my question is for you is, what is your experience in that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I don't know if my experience is any different than anyone else's. You know, I myself went through a pretty big loss this week, and with someone in my family. And I think with that, you start to think, did Uncle Percy go with much regrets, right? And you start to rationalize things. But here was a person, here was an uncle of mine who came to the United States, and to the end of his life said, no, I lived it the way that I wanted to. I didn't hurt anybody. I understand the risks that I'm taking when I eat my Popeye's fried chicken, but I want to go out on my terms, And then you also see folks, this is a very real story. This is one of the reasons why I became very sad in working in happiness courses, was I had met an alum of the university that I was working at. Everything he ever wanted when he was in university, every A, perfect student, got into every class, every job, grad school he wanted. He was working in a very, very prestigious company in New York. He was making a lot of money. And so I came back and I was like, it's good to see you, man. Like, how have you been? And he said, horrible. I blow all of my money on cocaine and hookers every night. And here's this very prestigious person in a suit talking about how lonely he was. And so I'm not saying that just because I think about this or just because I use the word positive psychology doesn't mean we can't think of people in our own lives who are settling, like I was settling when I was in my 20s. And even now, if I think about it, I might be settling for some things. Or other people who are striving, they're working their butts off in order to please other people. And I think that sort of thing that you're talking about, Tristan, where do I see that? I would not only say that I saw it in hospitals, but I see it everywhere. And even with happiness coaches, they'll talk about settling. Even when I was teaching a course, that doesn't mean that I'm the guru of happiness. It's possibly one of the greatest mysteries, challenges, whatever you want to call it, of the human experience. And I think that's why when you gave me the opportunity to talk to my son about creating his own blueprint, that's why I feel a lot of freedom right now. So I guess to answer your question in a very short form, I don't know. I think I see it. But I know for myself, I know when I feel it. And I'm hoping that when you guys experience it, you know when you feel it too. Settling, striving.
A question about also a little bit skeptic maybe.
Yeah.
How can you measure the success, and how do I know a coach will work?
Return on investment.
Return on investment.
Return on investment, exactly.
So is your question asking about the efficacy of coaching?
Yes.
Nowadays?
Basically, how do you know it works? Because I got a lot of questions from, okay, we have a coach, and somebody needs help.
Yeah.
And I don't think you need help with a coach. It can also go, you do positive things, but okay,
yeah.
Let's say you need help. How do you know it works, and how do you know it pays off?
Yeah, so this was a big reason why I went into the coaching school that I went into at the time. I was studying I was getting my degree I was getting my doctoral degree, and so it was important to have qualitative and quantitative analytics to be able to talk to folks about. So I came in here and I said, okay, here's this field of coaching where anybody can call themselves a coach nowadays, not very regulated. We don't have very clear success measures, and yet there's a couple schools out there that have studied measures like quality of life. And especially when you're looking at like anecdotal studies, clients will oftentimes talk about the benefits of coaching, right? Especially clients who don't feel like they were punished and are getting into coaching because they want to, versus feeling like it's a remedial punishment for them not doing well at work. Coaching is probably as successful as you putting somebody in the penalty box or something like that. When they feel like that they're in trouble or they feel like they're not opting into it, I don't see anything changing, But there have been enough studies that show, I'll definitely send it to you so you can send it out in the show notes, where quality of life goes up, satisfaction with relationships, engagement in work goes up. Part of the reason I also love being a positive psychologist is this idea that if someone is no longer feeling like they're settling or striving and they're moving towards flourishing, less missed days of work, more productivity outcomes. And I know that for a fact with Corey Keyes' study from Emory University in Atlanta. And that's been done on a worldwide scale to study those things. As a coach, I don't come out trying to be somebody's guru. As a coach, all I do is create space for exploration for someone to have their own aha moments. And in fact, I no longer am Michael Jackson when I become a coach. I'm just the person that sets up the stage so the person can dance.
It would be funny if my coach looked like Michael Jackson. And then like, ooh.
Y'all got to see what he just did. The movie he just did. We need to replicate that.
Yeah.
But I do think that when it comes to coaching, the International Coaching Federation I hope that they continue to step up with regulations in the same way that mental health regulations were stepped up. So people don't just sell you mental health in a bottle and you're suddenly cured nowadays. I believe it's a process in the same way that when you engage with any friend or therapist or mentor, it's about a good relationship and then engaging in that process. And then like what you talked about at the very beginning, we're all plus oneing each other. Whether they're in a negative space or whether they're at zero or whether they're in a positive space, we're all plus oneing towards infinity. So growth is always happening. And a coach has a place, but a coach doesn't have a place everywhere. So I hope that helps explain a little bit.
Or can you give us your explanation, your definition of coaching? What's your definition of coaching?
So I'll tell you what coaching isn't first. So a coach is not a mentor. A coach is not someone who's going to tell somebody what to do. And so as humans, we sometimes will listen to someone else's issue, and the first thing we'll say is, Tristan, I know exactly what you need to do, right? That's the same thing with consulting. Consulting will come in, I will diagnose the issue, and then I'll leave. Therapist will go and look at your past, right? A coach will help you identify your ideal self and then allow you to use the tools to become your ideal self. So for example, or actually here's a metaphor. One metaphor that's the difference between coaching and therapy is that if us three were walking along some path and we come up to a locked fence, a therapist would say, Tristan, Denny, why do you think this fence is locked? The coach would go and say, Tristan, Denny, how do we get to the other side? It's about progress. It's about continuing to move forward. And it doesn't discount what a therapist does. We need therapists. But also at the same time, when we figure out why that fence is locked and know how to unlock it, sometimes there's people who can help you get to the other side faster. Or I like to say that sometimes I'll give you a little boost. Step on my back and get to the other side of that fence. And that's what good friends do sometimes. That's what good support does. And so I think that's also what a decent coach does as well. They don't engage with it.
That's a nice metaphor, man. Yeah, I think we're going to use that one. People are visually programmed, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I also like to talk in metaphors, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this is a very good metaphor what coaching really is. So thanks, man.
Yeah. Thanks for asking a hard question.
When I go to my therapist, I will say, you're supposed to ask me.
You're supposed to ask me why my fence is locked. No, but there is a role for coaches in our modern day society, but then there are also coaches there are also folks that claim themselves as coaches. I'm sorry, people, but like subscribing to a program that says you're going to make $600,000 in 90 days is not a coaching program. A coach is someone who engages with you and helps you create the blueprint that works for you. Because oftentimes coaching, since I'm not since I'm not telling anyone what to do, it's usually what they've wanted to say or the person they've often wanted to be, and they haven't had the space to say it, you know? So for example, if I had a coach, I might have said very early on, I want to be Michael Jackson, but it would have helped me understand it's not Michael Jackson that I wanted to be. It was an empowering person that could take a mic and talk positive psychology and empower. So I never saw that in my family. You know, I just saw healers and doctors. And so I did have to create a blueprint. And I think everyone sort of has to create one at one point in their life or another. Yeah.
Are there any boundaries with coaching? Because is there a sort of fine line that coaching stops and you need to have another different kind of help?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what is the boundary?
Yeah. So if at all, I think that the person, well, number one is if a person is coming in and they're a threat to themselves or another, that's not the place for coaching. There are other people who have taken oaths and
that's the fence.
Yeah, that's totally the fence, right? There's also time for consulting. I have mental health practitioners that I can call and say, I've got this case and this person is frustrated with this. What does that look like for you on your side? And they'll say, this doesn't seem like clinical depression. This seems like situational depression, because they're probably not doing well in their classes right now. And so a coach could help them do well in the classes, and then the situation will clear up. It's not something that needs medication right now. And so I'm not looking for it to replace anything. I'm not looking for it to compete with anything. I think the boundaries will continue to get clearer as the ICF and coaches and therapists work together. I think also at the same time, if we wanted to go into another show and talk about the stigma that coaches have, you know, we could, but I think there's very clear boundaries.
What is the biggest stigma? Because let me tell you the stigma I usually hear. There's sort of reaction that something has to be bad, you have to be sick, and then you go to a coach.
Yep, I would say that that's one of them. I think also at the same time, there could also be a stigma that coaches don't use science. We have magic wands and crystal balls and stuff like that. I don't use a diagnostic tool when I meet with my clients, but I do use assessments that have been pretty rigorously tested. And if the assessments turn out funky, luckily I'm not at the point where I feel so needy for a quick buck that, you know, I know integrity-wise that this is a person who needs to go and probably see somebody else. I hope my fellow coaches out there are doing the same thing.
I was very happy with the things you said, situational depression and clinical depression. There are a lot of examples in this world that we can speak of situational depression. I think talent management, or we think that talent management, it's nature, it's nurture, and on the top of it, it's something you really like. So there are a lot of people sitting in a sort of situational depression. So talent management, discovering their talents via a coach, can get them out of the depression.
Yes.
So you join that opinion?
I would say that via a coach is the part why I hesitated, because oftentimes you can coach yourself out of it or the situation just clears up itself. One of the great things about having the coach is that it gives you space to be and think. So let's say that you are a single parent that is dealing with a daughter, a divorce, you're getting pulled in a million directions. The coach, when you come into that space, it's client time. You get to focus on client, yourself. You're not running around thinking about mom's surgery. You're not thinking about something else. And that can expedite the process so much faster. And so I would agree with that. I think that's awesome, the nature, the nurture, and the light triangle that you bring up. It's so kind of intuitive. And I think it also goes with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So like those lower things, as you start meeting those things, the sort of those lower needs, and you move higher and higher and higher up that chain, you're thinking about things like self-actualization, self-transcendence and serving others. And I think that's where coaching, there's a great place where coaches can come back and revisit the work of Maslow, where Maslow left off.
Yeah.
And we're talking about talent. I think this is a nice bridge. What is your talent?
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, how about this? I think one of the things that I really enjoy about having gone through a doctoral program is that I've had the privilege, and sometimes it felt like hell, but it was a privilege to go through the rigors of some pretty hardcore concepts. And I do love being able to take those concepts and just talk about it like over a muffin. Like I think one of the things that I would love to see happen with positive psychology and other summits, these are expensive. Getting degrees in positive psychology is expensive. And so if I can come here, and I don't know how much your podcast costs, I hope it's free, for a very inexpensive price, we can access some of the greatest works and also some of the most dense works and turn that into everyday language, And the fact that, we're waxing positive psychology right now, like, to me, that's one of the things that I am most excited about, is I can talk about positive psychology without having to go into, this is the statistical significance of this and this effect happening here and this happening here. I just want to talk about my kid.
And if you would describe your talent in one sentence?
I can't put anything into one sentence.
I think that's very hard for you.
So my talent in one sentence would be taking dense concepts and making them appealing and interesting to a larger audience.
Mark, I'm proud of you. I'll give you the high five.
I hope that made sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the talents I see in you is like you can tell a story, and telling something is something you can learn, but the skills of giving energy, convincing people with your story is something you do, and that is something you cannot learn. So for me, that is a talent I see in you.
Well, that's much appreciated.
Yeah, and I think besides that, I think it's very hard to be inspiring and also a good listener, but you are an inspirer and also a very good listener. So I'm a little bit jealous, man. Yeah.
You were the first person. One of your talents, if you can quiet us, shut us down, then you have to be really good.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And I do wish that some of the things that we talked about before we started recording we could continue to share, because both of your stories and the way that y'all connected, it was pretty inspiring. And so, not to deflect, but you creating the space for me to feel like it's just the three of us right now, talking and feeling like we've met before. Like I feel like we're just having beers and hanging out. That's a talent too, and I much appreciate that. And I know that y'all were. I don't know if you'll cut this out, but the fact that you've been hustling all day to get some really big name folks in there, and then this quiet little Asian dude walks by and you also got our stories on there. That's much to be appreciated as well. And I thank you for that.
Dit is de Ongekend Talent Podcast. Deze podcast wordt mogelijk gemaakt door Gulliver Trainingen, Link Fotografie, Meerte Koppelaar Identity and Brand Design en Root Media. Dit is de Ongekend Talent Podcast.